Tonight, no pharaohs. There will be no curses, no gold masks, no tombs opened by torchlight. Those stories are loud, and this is not the hour for them. Instead, we are going to spend an evening with the people who did the ordinary work, the ones who made the bread and swept the floors and wrote down how much barley had arrived, and went home when it got dark. They lived along a narrow green river in the middle of an enormous desert, roughly 3,000 years ago. Almost none of them could read. Almost none of them ever saw a king. Most of them never traveled further than a day's walk from where they were born. And we know a surprising amount about them because Egypt is dry, and dry places keep things. Not just monuments, laundry lists, sick notes, complaints about a neighbor's donkey, a note from a man asking his wife to send more bread because the bread here is bad. That is what tonight is. Small things from a long time ago in a place where the evenings were warm. Let's begin just before dawn, on the bank of the river. Everything in Egypt begins with the Nile, so we will begin there too. Before first light, the river is a broad band of dark, moving very slowly. It is quieter than you might expect. There is water, and there are frogs, and there are birds beginning to shift in the papyrus at the edges. The Nile flows north, which confused visitors for centuries, and the wind blows south, which is a piece of luck so useful that it shaped the entire civilization. A boat going downstream simply drifts. A boat going upstream raises a sail and lets the wind push it. The hieroglyph for travel south is a boat with a sail up. The sign for travel north is a boat with the sail down. Two signs. The whole transport system of a country settled by geography. The riverbank at this hour smells of silt and wet reeds. There are fishing boats made of bundled papyrus, tied together and shaped upward at the ends. Light enough for one person to carry. Cheap enough that everyone has one. Beside them, a few wooden boats belonging to people who are doing better. The land beyond the bank is black, not dark, black. Egyptians called their country Kemet, which means the black land, after the color of the soil the river left behind. Beyond the reach of the flood, where the soil turns pale and nothing grows, they called it Deshret, the red land. Black land, red land. Life and not life, with a line between them you can stand on. That line is remarkably sharp. Even today, from the air, you can see it. Green, 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 then desert within the space of a few meters. Every year in late summer, the river rose. It came from rains far to the south that no Egyptian ever saw, and for a long time nobody knew why it happened, only that it did. The water spread across the fields, sat there for weeks, and then withdrew, leaving behind a fresh layer of fine, dark silt. This is why Egypt could feed itself for 3,000 years, while other places exhausted their soil. The river fertilized the fields for free, on a schedule, without anyone doing anything at all. The whole calendar was built on it. Not 4 seasons, 3. Akhet, the flood. Pere, the emergence, when the water pulled back and you planted. Shemu, the harvest, when you cut and gathered and hoped it was enough. And because it mattered so much, they measured it obsessively. There were structures called nilometers, staircases or shafts descending into the river, with marks cut into the stone. Officials read them and recorded the height. A good flood meant food. A low flood meant a hard year. A very high flood meant homes lost. The reading also set the taxes. If the river was generous that year, the state took more. So the man on the steps with a reed pen was not just watching water, he was deciding what your year would cost you. The sky is going pale now. The birds are up. Ibis, herons, ducks in the marsh grass. Somewhere a dog is barking at nothing. Along the bank, people are already moving. They will work through the cool of the morning, rest through the worst of the afternoon heat, and work again in the evening. Almost everything about the shape of the Egyptian day is a negotiation with the sun. The smell that fills a village first thing in the morning is bread. Egyptians ate a great deal of it. Bread and beer were the 2 things everyone had, the way we might think of rice or potatoes. The base of the meal, and often the wage. Workers were frequently paid in loaves and jars of beer, not as a quaint gesture. It was the salary. Records from a workman's village list daily rations by rank. So many loaves for a foreman, so many for a laborer. A man's standing could be read from the size of his bread allowance. Making it was slow work, and mostly done by women, and it began with grinding. Emmer wheat and barley had to be ground on a stone quern. A flat lower stone and a smaller upper stone pushed back and forth by hand. It took hours. It is hard on the knees, the back, and the shoulders, and skeletons from Egyptian villages show exactly that damage. Worn joints in the arms and spine of women who spent their lives at the grinding stone. It also put grit in the flour. Sand and stone dust came off the querns and went straight into the bread. Egyptian mummies famously have badly worn teeth, not from sugar, but from a lifetime of eating slightly gritty loaves. Even kings had it. The bread wore everyone's teeth down at the same rate. The dough was mixed, sometimes with a little seasoning, and baked in several ways. On the hot outside of a clay dome, in ceramic molds set among the embers, or as flat rounds directly on a heated surface. Bakeries in larger towns ran rows of conical bread molds, stacked and reused, and archaeologists find them by the thousand. Beer came from the same grain and was made in the same kitchens. Egyptian beer was not what the word suggests now. It was thick, closer to a soupy porridge than a clear drink.
lightly alcoholic, slightly sour and nourishing. It was often drunk through a strainer or a reed to keep the solids out. Children drank a weak version. It was safer than river water, and it had real calories in it. There is a text used to teach schoolboys that warns them at length against spending time in beer houses. It describes a young man drinking until he cannot speak sense, falling over, and being carried home. The teacher's point is that the boy should be studying instead. It has survived 3,000 years, and it reads exactly like a modern lecture about wasting your youth. Beyond bread and beer, the everyday diet was mostly vegetables and fish. Onions, leeks, garlic, cucumbers, lettuce, beans and lentils, dates and figs, fish from the river, dried and salted. Meat was expensive and mostly for festivals and the wealthy, though wildfowl from the marshes turned up more often. Cooking happened outside or in a corner room over a small fire in shallow clay pots. There was no chimney in most houses. There was a hole in the roof and a certain amount of smoke, and everyone got used to it. In the evening, families ate sitting on mats on the floor from shared bowls, using their hands and pieces of bread. Low stools existed, tables were small and usually just held the food. It was, by the standards of the ancient world, a decent diet. Enough of it, most years, for most people. Which is not a small thing to be able to say about anywhere in the Bronze Age.
In every village of any size, there was someone who could write. He was, quietly, one of the most powerful people there. Perhaps one person in 100 could read and write in ancient Egypt. Some estimates put it lower. Everyone else lived inside a world of documents they could not check. Because Egypt ran on documents. Grain deliveries, tax assessments, work rosters, court testimony, marriage settlements, inventories of tools. If it existed, someone counted it and wrote it down, and the record went into a chest, and the chest went into a storeroom. A scribe trained for years. Boys started young. Schooling seems to have begun somewhere around age 5 to 10, and they learned by copying. Over and over, onto broken pottery shards and flakes of limestone, because papyrus was too valuable to waste on a beginner. Thousands of these practice pieces survive, some with a teacher's corrections still visible in red. They copied model letters. They copied lists of towns and titles, and they copied a text endlessly, whose entire message was, being a scribe is better than every other job. It is one of the most human documents to survive from the ancient world. It goes through the trades one by one and makes each sound miserable. The metal worker, with fingers like crocodile skin, who smells worse than fish. The barber, wandering the streets looking for chins. The farmer, who works all year and then has the tax collectors arrive. The launderer, working by the river where the crocodiles are. And then, after all of that, the conclusion: be a scribe. It saves you from labor. It protects you from work. There is no dust on your hands. The teachers were not subtle, but you can see why it worked. Writing was a way out. It was one of the few ladders in a society where most people did their father's job in their father's village. A working scribe's kit was small and portable, a wooden palette with 2 round hollows for black and red ink cakes, a slot holding reed pens, a small water pot. He carried it under his arm. The palette itself became the hieroglyph for writing, black ink for the body of the text, red for headings, for totals, for corrections, and for things considered dangerous or unlucky. Our word rubric comes from the same instinct thousands of years later. Papyrus was made from the reed that grew everywhere along the river, the pith cut into strips, laid in 2 crossed layers, pressed and dried into a sheet. Good sheets were valuable enough to be scraped clean and reused. Ordinary notes went on limestone flakes and broken pot pieces, which were free, and which is why so much of them survives. Those scraps are where the ordinary voices are. There is a note asking someone to send fish and vegetables. There is a workman recording that he was absent because his wife was ill, and another because he was brewing beer, and another because he had been bitten by a scorpion. There is a letter from a man complaining that people are taking his water. There is a father writing about a son who will not settle down. There is even correspondence written to the dead. Letters left at tombs, addressing a relative directly, asking them to stop causing trouble for the living from the other side, or to intervene in a family dispute. They are written politely and with obvious feeling. None of it was meant to be read 3,000 years later. That is exactly why it is worth reading. There is one village we know better than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. It sat in a dry valley in the desert on the west bank near Thebes, walled, isolated, and purpose-built. The people who lived there were the craftsmen who cut and painted the royal tombs. Sculptors, draftsmen, plasterers, carpenters, and their families. Because it was in the desert, everything they threw away survived. Because they were literate, unusually so since their work required it, they wrote constantly. The result is tens of thousands of texts about daily life in a single small community over several centuries. We know the names of individual families. We know who owed whom what. We know who was arguing with the neighbors. The work pattern was 10 days on, 2 days off. The men walked over the ridge to the valley where the tombs were, worked in shifts by lamplight in cramped rock chambers, and stayed in simple huts near the site during the working stretch, coming home for the rest days. The lamps were wicks in oil, and the amount of oil issued was recorded because it measured the working hours. Somebody counted the wicks. The village kept a register of absences, and it is one of the most quietly delightful documents from antiquity. Reasons recorded for men missing work include illness, a family death, a festival, brewing beer, building a house, an argument with a wife, and, repeatedly, being stung by a scorpion. There is also the world's earliest recorded labor strike. In the reign of Ramesses III, the grain rations that were the workers' wages arrived late, then late again. Then they stopped coming. The men waited, complained through the proper channels, and got nothing. So they downed tools, walked out of the work site, and sat down at the mortuary temples, the places where the state's business was done and where officials would have to see them. They said plainly that they were hungry, that their children were hungry, that they had reached this point not out of insolence, but because there was nothing left. Officials arrived, negotiated, and eventually delivered the grain. The strike happened more than once. The record of it survives because a scribe in the village wrote it all down, including what was said. 3,000 years ago, workers withheld their labor over unpaid wages, and it was documented, and it worked. The houses themselves were narrow and deep, a few rooms in a row, a small enclosed front room, a main room with a column supporting the roof, a back area for storage and cooking, and stairs to a flat roof where people slept in hot weather. Mud brick walls, whitewashed. Small windows set high to keep the sun out. Inside, there were low beds, headrests instead of pillows, wooden chests, reed mats, oil lamps, and small niches in the wall for household figures and images of family members who had died. The religion of the house was not the religion of the great temples. Ordinary people had little to do with the enormous state cults. At home, they kept small protective gods. Bes, a squat bearded dwarf with a lion's mane who guarded sleep and childbirth, and Taweret, a standing hippopotamus who protected pregnant women. Both are cheerful, slightly odd-looking, and appear on furniture, mirrors, headrests, and amulets everywhere. The gods who mattered most in daily life were not the ones on temple walls. They were the ones who watched over your bed. The heat goes out of the day quickly here. By late afternoon, the light turns long and orange, and the mud brick walls hold warmth like a stone in a fire. People come back out. The village becomes sociable again. Someone is fixing a tool. Children are still up, chasing each other between the houses, playing with clay animals and simple board games. One of those games was called Senet. It had 30 squares in 3 rows, and pieces moved by throwing stairs instead of dice. People played it constantly for centuries. Over time, it also came to mean something more. A game standing for the passage through the afterlife. So you find boards painted in tombs as well as worn wooden ones from kitchens. Music was part of ordinary evenings. Harps, lutes, double reed pipes, and everywhere, clapping. There were professional musicians, but there was also just singing, the way people sing when they are doing something else. As the sun goes down, the sound changes. The birds settle in the reeds. The donkeys quiet. Somewhere along the bank, a dog again, briefly. Up on the flat roofs, families spread mats. In summer, nearly everyone sleeps outside, above the heat held in the walls. Headrests of wood or stone, which look uncomfortable and are surprisingly not. Keep your head off the ground and let air move around your neck. To the west, past the last irrigated field, the desert begins. That direction mattered. The sun went down there, so west became the direction of the dead, and the cemeteries were built on that side of the river. The living stayed on the east bank where the sun rose. It was that simple, and it stayed that way for thousands of years. Out on the desert edge, the great tombs stand in the last light. From the village, they are just shapes on the horizon. Familiar, permanent, part of the view. Some of the people lying on those roofs helped build them. Their fathers did too. We tend to imagine the pyramids as the work of a mysterious lost genius. The evidence points somewhere calmer, organized, well-fed, paid work crews with names. Teams that called themselves things like the Friends of Khufu and left their names scrawled inside the stone where nobody was supposed to see. They ate bread and beer and a good deal of beef. There was a whole town beside the site, with bakeries running at industrial scale. They were proud of it. They were also, presumably, tired at the end of the day and glad when the shift finished. The stars come out over the valley. Egyptian watched them closely. They used the return of the star Sirius to the dawn sky to predict the flood, which is about as practical as astronomy gets. Priests tracked the night hours by the stars for temple ritual. But on a roof in a village, the stars were probably just the sky. The last light goes from the western cliffs. The river turns the color of the sky and then loses that too. Someone pinches out a lamp downstairs. They were not trying to be remembered. The man reading the flood on the steps, the woman at the grinding stone, the scribe with black ink under his fingernails, the painter who walked over the ridge for 10 days and then came home. None of them expected anyone to be listening 3,000 years later. They complained about their supervisors. They stayed home when they were sick. They played board games badly and argued about the water. They kept a small, ugly, cheerful god beside the bed to watch over their sleep. And then the river rose and went down and rose again, and the days closed over them the way days do. The Nile is still there. It still runs north while the wind pushes south. The black soil is still black. Whatever is unfinished tonight will still be there tomorrow. It always was. The pictures will drift for a while. There is nothing more to listen to. Good night.